Daniel dropped the divorce papers directly onto my newborn daughter's blanket. Sign them right now. I stared at him from the recliner in our living room, still wearing mesh hospital underwear beneath my sweatpants, because I had given birth to twins less than 72 hours earlier. One baby slept against my chest. The other cried softly in the bassinet beside me. And my husband, the man who once cried hearing their heartbeats for the first time, stood near the fireplace, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive gray suit like he was late for a business meeting instead of destroying his family. Daniel, my voice cracked immediately. Please don't do this today. He wouldn't even look at me. I already signed my half. Outside rain tapped softly against the windows of our suburban Dallas home. Everything smelled faintly like baby powder and hospital disinfectant. The kind of smell that should have meant new beginnings. Instead, it smelled like the end of my life. My mother-in-law, Barbara, stood in the kitchen doorway, holding her purse tightly beneath one arm. Not crying, not shocked. Annoyed. Well, she sighed dramatically. We've all had difficult days, Sarah. Sitting around crying won't change reality. Reality? I looked down at the divorce papers shaking in my hands. Daniel Bennett requesting immediate dissolution of marriage. No contest. Primary asset separation already arranged. I could barely process the words through the exhaustion pounding behind my eyes. 3 days earlier, I'd nearly died giving birth. 36 hours of labor. Emergency surgery. 2 premature babies. And now this. I don't understand, I whispered. Daniel finally looked at me then, cold, calm, detached. The expression hurt worse than yelling would have. You haven't been happy in a long time, he said flatly. I almost laughed from disbelief. Happy? I was recovering from carrying his children while surviving swollen ankles, chronic nausea, sleepless nights, and terrifying complications the doctors warned could kill me. Of course, I wasn't glowing like a magazine wife. But before I could answer, Barbara crossed her arms. My son deserves peace, she snapped. And frankly, this house hasn't had peace in months. The baby in the bassinet started crying harder. I instinctively reached for her, wincing from the sharp pain in my abdomen. Daniel didn't move to help. Not even once. That's the moment something inside me truly broke. Not when I saw the papers. Not when Barbara insulted me. When the father of my children ignored the sound of his own daughter crying. A phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. Daniel glanced down immediately, and for the first time all morning he smiled. Not a big smile, just soft, warm, intimate. The kind of smile I hadn't seen in over a year. My stomach turned. Is it her? I asked quietly. Barbara muttered under her breath. Oh, for heaven's sake. Daniel slipped the phone into his pocket. That's none of your business anymore. But I already knew. Vanessa. 31 years old. Real estate influencer. Expensive blonde hair, white teeth, perfect Instagram life. Daniel had started working late around the same time. She began commenting on his social media posts. At first, I ignored the feeling in my gut. Then I got pregnant, and suddenly my husband started sleeping farther away from me in bed, answering texts outside, criticizing everything. The way I dressed. The weight I gained. The fact that I cried easily. The fact that I was tired. You changed, he told me once during my 7th month of pregnancy. I remember sitting in the dark after he fell asleep, wondering how a man could resent the very sacrifice that was giving him children. I need those signed. The room went silent except for the babies crying softly. I looked at him for a long time. The man I met at 26. The man who brought me soup when I had the flu. The man who danced with me barefoot in our kitchen to old Frank Sinatra songs. Gone. Or maybe he was never fully real to begin with. My hands trembled violently as I picked up the pen. Sarah, Barbara said impatiently. Dragging this out is embarrassing. Embarrassing. Not heartbreaking. Not cruel. Embarrassing. I signed quietly, one signature beneath another, while tears slid silently down my face and onto my daughter's blanket. Daniel took the papers immediately. Relief flashed across his face so quickly it almost looked triumphant. Then he did something I will never forget for the rest of my life. He leaned down, not toward me, toward the babies. For one brief second, hope rushed through my chest. Maybe he was going to kiss them goodbye. Maybe somewhere deep inside him, Their father still existed. Instead, he simply stared at them like strangers. Then he straightened his jacket and walked toward the front door. "That's it," I whispered weakly. He paused, but he never turned around. "I'll have someone pick up the rest of my things next week." The door closed softly behind him. And just like that, my marriage ended quieter than I ever imagined possible. Barbara lingered awkwardly for several seconds afterward. Then she looked at me with something almost resembling pity. "You're still young," she muttered. "Maybe someday you'll find somebody who actually wants this kind of life." I stared at her in disbelief. "This kind of life?" She gestured vaguely toward the babies, toward me, toward motherhood itself. Then she left too. The house became unbearably silent after that. I sat there for what felt like hours holding my daughters while sunlight slowly faded through the living room windows. No dramatic screaming. No broken dishes. Just emptiness. That night, while feeding one twin at nearly midnight, I turned on the television mostly to escape the silence. And there he was, Daniel, standing beside Vanessa at some charity gala downtown. She wore a silver designer gown worth more than our monthly mortgage payment. The interviewer laughed while asking how they met. Vanessa smiled directly into the camera. "Sometimes," she said sweetly, "people meet the person they were truly meant to build a life with." Daniel smiled beside her. "No guilt. No hesitation." Then Vanessa added something that made my blood run cold. "Some women simply aren't strong enough to keep a successful man happy." The audience laughed lightly. I turned the television off immediately. For several seconds, I just sat there in darkness, holding my sleeping daughters against my chest. Then slowly, I looked toward the hallway closet. Inside it sat a dusty cardboard box I hadn't touched since my father died 2 years earlier. My father had spent 40 years as a local television journalist in Texas. And before he died, he told me something I never forgot. "Your voice matters more than you think it does, sweetheart." Still trembling, I carried the babies toward the closet and pulled the box onto the floor. Inside were old notebooks, cassette recordings, press badges, and one yellow sticky note attached to the top binder in my father's handwriting. "When life breaks your heart, tell the truth anyway." I stared at those words for a very long time. Then, for the first time since Daniel walked out the door, I stopped crying. The twins developed opposite sleep schedules almost immediately. If Ava slept, Lily screamed. If Lily finally drifted off, Ava decided the world was ending. By the 3rd week after Daniel left, I honestly couldn't remember the last time I slept more than 90 consecutive minutes. The Dallas house felt too large now, too quiet in some rooms, too loud in others. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of abandonment. Daniel's empty side of the closet. The missing coffee mug he took because it was his favorite. The half-circle stain on the garage floor where his BMW used to sit every night. Some mornings I'd catch myself listening for the sound of his key in the front door, before remembering he belonged to someone else now. The humiliation of that realization never got easier. Bills started arriving faster than I could process them. Hospital bills. Pediatric bills. Utility notices. Formula receipts. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with both babies sleeping beside me while I stared at my checking account balance and quietly panicked. Daniel had transferred exactly what the divorce agreement required. Nothing more. No extra support. No concern. Just legal obligation. Barbara sent one text message 2 weeks after he left. "You need to learn independence eventually." I deleted it immediately, then cried for 20 straight minutes while folding baby laundry. That became my life for a while. Feeding. Rocking. Crying quietly. Repeating. Some nights I was so exhausted I slept sitting upright with one baby against each shoulder, because laying them down risked waking them again. But slowly, tiny acts of survival started adding up. Mrs. Hernandez from next door began leaving casseroles on my porch every Sunday evening. The older cashier at Walgreens started slipping extra diaper coupons into my bags. A retired nurse from church volunteered to watch the twins for 2 hours every Thursday, so I could shower and grocery shop alone. People noticed when women were drowning, especially older women. They recognized the look because many of them had worn it once themselves. One rainy afternoon, while the twins napped beside me, I opened my father's old journalism box again. At first, I only meant to organize it. But then I found a cassette recording labeled. My father's voice filled the room instantly. Warm, steady, familiar enough to make my throat tighten. Real journalism, he said in the recording, isn't about famous people. It's about ordinary folks trying to survive ordinary heartbreak. I sat there listening while my daughters slept. And for the first time in weeks, something besides grief moved inside me. Memory. Purpose. Before marrying Daniel, I used to write constantly. Small community stories. Local interviews. Human interest columns for the Dallas Morning News freelance section. Then life happened. Marriage. Schedules. Pregnancy. And somewhere along the way, I stopped sounding like myself. That night, after both twins finally fell asleep around 2 in the morning, I opened my old laptop and started writing again. At first it hurt. Everything hurt. My body. My pride. My heart. But the words came anyway. I wrote about an elderly widower who spent every Friday playing piano at a nursing home because he said loneliness sounded quieter with music in the room. I wrote about a waitress working double shifts to pay for her grandson's insulin. I wrote about ordinary people surviving invisible pain. And somehow writing about their resilience helped me survive my own. A week later, I emailed one story to a tiny local radio station. I expected nothing. Instead, 2 days later, my phone rang during a diaper change. "Is this Sarah Bennett?" An older man asked. "Yes, this is Sarah." "Well," he muttered, "this is Frank Dalton over at KTXA Community Radio." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "You still writing?" I nearly laughed, trying not to drop a diaper wipe. "Well," he muttered, "your piece made my secretary cry into her tuna sandwich." That became the closest thing to a job offer I'd heard in months. Frank was 68 years old with suspenders, thick glasses, and the exhausted voice of a man who'd spent decades fighting shrinking local news budgets. "Best field reporter Texas ever had," Frank told me during our first meeting. "Mean poker player, though." For the first time since the divorce, I genuinely smiled. The station couldn't pay much. Tiny freelance checks. Late-night editing work. Weekend voiceovers. But it was something. More importantly, it was mine. So while my daughters slept beside the desk in borrowed bassinets, I worked. I edited audio clips with one hand while holding bottles with the other. I interviewed local veterans during nap schedules. I recorded radio segments at midnight wearing spit-up stained sweatshirts. It was messy, exhausting, beautiful. Meanwhile, Daniel's life looked perfect online. Perfect vacations. Perfect rooftop dinners. Perfect smiling photographs beside Vanessa. Every few days another picture appeared. #blessed. #new beginnings. #living authentically. I stopped looking eventually. Not because it didn't hurt. Because it hurt too much. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Frank assigned me a small story about a group of elderly veterans facing eviction from a retirement complex outside Fort Worth. Nothing glamorous. No celebrity angel. Just frightened old men trying not to lose the last place they still called home. I spent 2 days interviewing them while the twins stayed with Mrs. Hernandez. One widower showed me photographs of his late wife folded carefully inside his wallet. Another cried describing how he couldn't afford both medication and rent anymore. When the story aired, something exploded. Calls flooded the station. Donations poured in. Within 48 hours, local businesses raised enough money to save the housing complex temporarily. And suddenly, people wanted to know who reported the story. Frank walked into the studio grinning 3 days later. National Morning Today interview request. My stomach dropped. No. Yes. No. Absolutely not. Frank folded his arms. Your father would haunt me personally if I let you say no. I stared at the email while panic and excitement crashed together inside my chest. Me. National television? I hadn't even fully healed from childbirth yet. Then my phone buzzed. A news alert notification. I almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity won. The article headline froze me instantly. Real estate influencer Vanessa Marlowe announces engagement to Dallas entrepreneur Daniel Bennett. Below it sat a glossy photograph of them smiling outside some luxury hotel. Daniel looked happy. Carefree. Like his daughters had never existed. I swallowed hard and locked my phone screen. Then slowly, I looked back down at the interview request. And for the first time since signing those divorce papers, I realized my life might not be over after all. The morning of the interview, one of the twins threw up directly into my hair. Honestly, it felt on brand for my life lately. I stood in the bathroom of the tiny hotel room in Manhattan at 5:30 in the morning, trying to rinse formula out of my blonde curls while both babies cried from their portable bassinets near the bed. "You girls are really committed to keeping me humble," I muttered sleepily. Outside the window, New York glowed gray and rainy beneath the early dawn. 20 minutes later, Frank knocked on the hotel door carrying coffee and enough nervous energy for both of us. "You ready to become famous?" he asked. "I'd rather survive breakfast first." He laughed so hard he nearly spilled coffee onto the carpet. That laugh helped more than he probably realized because beneath my calm expression, I was terrified. Not of television. Of being seen. Really seen. For months, I'd hidden inside grief. Now suddenly millions of strangers were about to hear my voice. And somewhere in Dallas, Daniel might hear it too. The thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. At the studio, producers rushed everywhere wearing headsets while makeup artists powdered my face under blinding lights. One young assistant smiled warmly at the twins. "Oh my gosh, they're adorable." "Thank you," I whispered automatically. I still wasn't used to hearing kindness without suspicion attached to it. A few minutes before airtime, the host, Linda Mercer, a silver-haired woman in her 60s beloved by half the country, walked over personally. "You're Sarah?" she asked gently. I nodded nervously. She glanced at the baby sleeping beside me. Then she squeezed my hand softly. "You already survived the hard part, honey." And somehow those simple words steadied me. When the cameras finally rolled, I expected my voice to shake. Instead, something strange happened. I remembered my father. The way he used to lean toward interview subjects like their stories genuinely mattered. The way he believed ordinary people deserved dignity. So I stopped thinking about cameras and started telling the truth. Linda introduced the segment by discussing the veterans' housing story that had gone viral nationwide. Then she turned toward me. "You've touched a lot of people recently," she said warmly. "Why do you think your reporting resonates so deeply?" I glanced down briefly at my daughters, sleeping peacefully in their matching cream-colored blankets. Then I answered honestly. "Because most people are carrying pain nobody else sees," I said quietly. "Especially older Americans. Loneliness, grief, financial fear. They deserve to feel heard." The studio fell silent. Not awkward silence. Listening silence. Linda nodded slowly. "You speak like someone who understands struggle personally." I smiled faintly. "I think life humbles everybody eventually." Back in Dallas, Daniel nearly dropped his coffee mug. At least that's what he later told me. One moment he was half listening to the television, while Vanessa criticized catering options for their engagement party. The next moment he heard my voice and froze. "Daniel?" Vanessa frowned from the kitchen island. "Are you even listening?" But he couldn't answer because suddenly there I was on national television. Not crying. Not broken. Not begging for him back. Strong. Calm. Beautiful in a way exhaustion and survival somehow made deeper instead of weaker. The camera briefly showed the twins beside me. Daniel later admitted that seeing them hit him harder than anything else because they looked older already. Different. Like time had moved forward without him. Meanwhile, in the studio, Linda smiled at me thoughtfully. "You became a mother recently, correct?" I nodded. "Twin girls. How has motherhood changed you?" For a second, emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. Because 6 months earlier, I would have answered that question differently. Back then, motherhood felt tangled with abandonment, failure, humiliation. But now, I looked directly into the camera. "It taught me that love isn't about convenience," I said softly. "Real love stays when things become difficult." Somewhere in Dallas, Daniel sat down slowly on the edge of his couch. Vanessa finally looked up from her phone. "What's wrong with you?" He barely heard her because suddenly he remembered everything he'd spent months trying not to think about. Sarah asleep against his shoulder. That's terrifying. The audience laughed warmly with me. Then Linda added something that changed everything. Our producers tell me several major networks are already contacting you about future reporting opportunities. I blinked. What? You're becoming one of the fastest-growing human interest journalists in the country. The audience applauded. And for one surreal second, I genuinely forgot how to breathe. Not because of fame. Because 6 months earlier, I'd been sitting alone in darkness believing my life was over. Now suddenly people saw value in my voice again. When the segment ended, producers crowded around while assistants handed me business cards and congratulated me. I felt overwhelmed, grateful, terrified. Frank wiped his eyes dramatically beside the set. Don't make fun of me, he warned. I'm old and emotional. I hugged him anyway. Back in Dallas, Vanessa muted the television abruptly. Oh my God, she snapped. You're still obsessed with her. Daniel finally looked at her. For the first time in months, he truly saw her clearly. Not glamorous. Not exciting. Just shallow. You said she was unstable, Vanessa continued sharply. That she trapped you with those babies. Daniel stared silently at the blank television screen. Because suddenly he realized something horrifying. Sarah had never humiliated him publicly. Never exposed him. Never begged. She simply rebuilt herself quietly while he spent 6 months pretending selfishness was freedom. Vanessa crossed her arms. Say something. But Daniel couldn't. Because for the first time since leaving his family, shame finally broke through the fantasy. That night after the twins fell asleep in the hotel room beside me, my phone rang unexpectedly. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Then something in my chest tightened strangely. I answered quietly. Hello. Silence. Then breathing. Uneven breathing. And finally Daniel's voice. I saw you today, he whispered hoarsely. I closed my eyes slowly. Outside rain tapped softly against the hotel window. I don't think, he choked out painfully, I ever understood what love actually was. For several seconds after Daniel spoke, neither of us said anything. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in the dark while my daughters slept beside me, listening to the sound of my ex-husband crying quietly on the other end of the line. 6 months earlier, I would have done anything to hear remorse in his voice. Now it mostly made me tired. You hurt me, I said softly. Daniel inhaled shakily. I know. No. Y whisperat. I don't think you do. Silence again. Heavy silence. The kind that settles between two people who once loved each other deeply and no longer know how to reach across the damage. Finally Daniel spoke carefully. When I left, his voice cracked. I convinced myself I deserved something easier. I looked toward the twins sleeping peacefully under the dim hotel lamp. Motherhood wasn't easy. Marriage wasn't easy. Love wasn't easy. Real life never is. You abandoned your daughters, I said quietly. A painful sound escaped him. I know. I almost snapped at him then. Almost told him knowing wasn't enough. But exhaustion won over anger. I need to sleep, I whispered. Sarah, wait. I hesitated. Then came the sentence I never expected from Daniel Bennett. I'm ashamed of who I became. And strangely enough, that sounded more honest than I'm sorry. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I simply stared out the rain-covered hotel window wondering how two people could destroy a marriage, so slowly, they barely noticed it happening until the ruins were already cold. Back in Dallas the next week, widows, veterans, grandmothers raising grandchildren, people thanking me for telling stories that still had a soul. Frank proudly carried stacks of them around the station like a proud grandfather. You know what your problem is now? He joked one afternoon. What? You matter. I laughed awkwardly. But privately, the sudden attention overwhelmed me. Not because of fame. Because for the first time in a very long while, people saw me as more than somebody's abandoned wife. They saw me as capable, strong, worth listening to. That scared me almost as much as it healed me. Meanwhile Daniel kept calling. At first I ignored him completely. Then the flowers started arriving. Not roses. Daniel knew I hated roses. Sunflowers. My favorite since college. No romantic notes. Just simple messages. I'm trying to become someone our daughters can respect someday. Or, thank you for answering the phone that night. Frank noticed the flowers immediately. Oh boy, he muttered dramatically. The idiot has discovered consequences. I smiled despite myself. But I still didn't trust Daniel. Not even close. Because apologies are easy when guilt finally catches up to someone. Change is harder. Then one Thursday afternoon, Daniel showed up unexpectedly at the pediatric clinic during the twins' checkup. I nearly froze when I saw him standing awkwardly near the reception desk holding a stuffed elephant toy. He looked thinner, tired, human. Not polished like the man in Vanessa's Instagram photographs. Just sad. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked toward the twins. Can I see them? My first instinct was no. Protect yourself. Protect them. But then Lily spotted the stuffed elephant and made a happy squealing sound. Then she grabbed his finger. And Daniel started crying right there in the waiting room. Not dramatic sobbing. Quiet devastation. I looked away because suddenly my own chest hurt too much. The nurse pretended not to notice. Older nurses have seen every kind of heartbreak imaginable. Later outside in the parking lot, Daniel stood beside his car nervously. I ended things with Vanessa, he said quietly. I blinked. When? 2 weeks ago. Part of me expected satisfaction. Instead I mostly felt numb. She said the girls were baggage, he admitted bitterly. And I realized. He swallowed hard. I'd become the kind of man who let someone talk about my daughters like they were inconvenient. The wind moved softly through the parking lot. Texas heat still lingered even in late October. I don't expect forgiveness, Daniel continued carefully, but I'm trying to fix what I can. I studied him for a long moment. The expensive suits were gone. No Rolex. No Palishsteregens. Just a man standing in sunlight finally forced to look directly at the damage he caused. Why now? I asked quietly. He answered immediately. Because seeing you on television made me realize something horrible. What? His eyes filled slowly with tears again. You survived the worst moment of your life, he whispered. And somehow you still became kinder. I survived nothing and became cruel. That sentence followed me home because deep down I knew it was true. Pain had changed both of us differently. Mine softened me. His hardened him. At least for a while. A few days later, while filming a segment at a senior community center, I interviewed an elderly widower named Arthur Green, 91 years old. Korean var veteran. Still wore polished shoes every day because his late wife used to tease him about wrinkled laces. Toward the end of the interview, Arthur asked about my daughters. Then somehow we ended up talking about divorce. Bitterness is expensive, he told me quietly while folding his hands in his lap. Costs people decades they don't get back. He sat silently listening. Arthur smiled gently. The people who hurt us don't always deserve forgiveness, he admitted. But sometimes we forgive because we deserve peace. That stayed with me. Not reconciliation. Not romance. Peace. 2 weeks before the twins' first birthday, Daniel called asking if he could stop by. Reluctantly, I agreed. When he arrived, he carried an old cardboard box against his chest. No flowers this time. No speeches. Just nervous silence. What's this? I asked carefully. Daniel set the box onto my kitchen table. Inside were photographs. Hospital bracelets. Baby ultrasound printouts. Tiny knitted hats from the NICU. Every single memory connected to the twins that he secretly kept after leaving. I stared at the items speechlessly. I couldn't throw them away, he admitted hoarsely. I tried. My throat tightened painfully. Then Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes, and finally said the words buried underneath every apology. I hated myself every day I stayed away. The twins took their first steps 3 days before Christmas. Both of them chose chaos. Lily walked directly into the coffee table, while Ava crashed into Daniel's legs holding half a banana. For a split second, the entire living room froze. Then both babies burst into identical outraged cries. And somehow, for the first time in years, laughter filled the house instead of tension. Real laughter. Messy laughter. The kind families survive on. Daniel scooped Ava into his arms while I picked up Lily. And for one brief strange moment, it felt like we were standing inside the ghost of the life we once planned together. Not perfect. Not untouched. But real. That had become important to me. Real. Not polished people who only loved others when life stayed easy. I trusted consistency now. The kind built slowly over ordinary days. And to Daniel's credit, he kept showing up. Week after week. Month after month. No dramatic promises. No pressure for forgiveness. Just presence. Pediatric appointments. Birthday parties. Late-night pharmacy runs when one of the twins developed an ear infection. He learned how to braid tiny pigtails badly. He memorized favorite bedtime songs. He sat through parenting classes voluntarily because, in his words, I missed enough already. Healing didn't happen all at once. Some days I still looked at him and remembered sitting alone in that living room signing divorce papers while bleeding from childbirth. Some nights I remembered Vanessa's smile on television. Barbara's cruel comments. The humiliation. Those scars didn't magically disappear because Daniel cried or apologized. But slowly something else grew beside the pain. Perspective. One rainy afternoon after filming a segment downtown, I returned home to find Daniel asleep on the floor beside the twins' playpen. One baby curled against each side of him. A children's book still open across his chest. For several seconds, I simply stood in the doorway watching them. And suddenly, I understood something difficult. People are rarely only the worst thing they've ever done. Daniel had been selfish, weak, cruel. But somewhere underneath all that damage was also a man trying desperately to become better than the version of himself he hated now. That mattered. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to soften the future. Meanwhile, my career continued growing faster than I ever imagined possible. The network expanded my segments into a weekly national feature highlighting ordinary Americans overcoming hardship. Veterans, teachers, widowers, single mothers, retired factory workers. The audience connected deeply with stories that felt human instead of sensational, especially older viewers. One executive admitted, "You remind people of the kind of journalism America misses." That compliment meant more to me than awards ever could because my father used to say the same thing. The week before Christmas, the network asked me to host a televised holiday special honoring everyday resilience across America. I almost said no. National broadcasts still made me nervous. But Frank nearly had a heart attack when I hesitated. "You carried twins for 9 months and survived public humiliation," he barked. "You can survive makeup artists." So I agreed. The night of the broadcast, snow fell softly outside the Manhattan studio, while audience members filled the theater carrying coats and paper coffee cups. Backstage, I adjusted my microphone with trembling fingers. Daniel sat in the audience holding Ava while Lily slept against Frank's shoulder 3 seats away. Seeing them together nearly broke my heart in the gentlest possible way, because family looked different now. Less shiny, more honest, and somehow stronger because of it. Right before airtime, Daniel approached quietly near the backstage curtains. "You nervous?" he asked softly. "A little." He smiled faintly. "You're going to be incredible." "Simple, Sarah," he said gently, "after everything you've been through this year, what do you believe matters most now?" The studio fell quiet. For a moment, I looked out toward the audience. At Frank. At my daughters. At Daniel holding one of the twins carefully against his chest. And suddenly the answer came easily. "Love that stays," I said softly. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my throat. Not the exciting kind. Not the flashy kind. The kind that shows up when life becomes inconvenient. The kind that sits beside hospital beds. Changes diapers at 3 in the morning. Forgives honestly. And keeps choosing people even after disappointment. The audience became completely silent. I smiled faintly through tears. I used to think success would heal heartbreak, I admitted. But it turns out healing comes from ordinary people loving each other consistently. When the broadcast ended, applause filled the studio. Backstage afterward, Daniel approached slowly while holding Ava asleep against his shoulder. "You became the woman I should have protected from the beginning," he whispered. Tears burned my eyes immediately. But this time they weren't tears of humiliation. They were grief, forgiveness, acceptance. Life had not unfolded the way either of us imagined. Some things were permanently broken, but some broken things still learned how to become beautiful again. And maybe that was enough. If this story touched your heart tonight, I hope it reminds you that real love is measured not by perfect moments, but by who stays beside you when life becomes difficult. Share this story with someone who may need hope, healing, or a reminder that it's never too late to become better than your worst mistakes. And if stories about resilience, family, forgiveness, and second chances still matter to you, don't forget to subscribe and join us again for another journey.